This week, New York's air quality causing great concern from many residents and action. Part of state officials will speak with the DEC on their continuing response to the potentially hazardous situation. Hi everybody and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. Before we get to the weather conditions, hey, the legislative session has ended after lawmakers ended up extending it to the 9th, one day, get things done. All right, back to that weather, right? Much of the state seeing some serious, hazy, smoke-filled skies over the past few days or so. Those thick clouds coming from the large wildfires happening up in Canada. State lawmakers issuing an air quality advisory urging sensitive groups, those who are immunocompromised, pulmonary issues, to stay inside, wear a mask if they're outside. The governor urging everyone to be patient.
This is our old friend, one you never want to see again perhaps, but this mask can make a difference, not just outdoor, although I did see someone outside running on my way here wearing one of these masks. At least he was wearing a mask. But even indoors, if you have a situation where you don't have air conditioning, you have a situation where you're not feeling good inside, continue to put this on. This will make a big difference for people. I know a lot of people are stressed out after what happened during the pandemic. I want people to know this is a very different circumstance. We believe it'll be short-term, not long-term decisions will have to be made to keep people indoors. We're not making those decisions. This is personal. But we are taking climate change so seriously here in the state of New York. Always have been. And I've said before, we're the first generation to really feel the effects of climate change and the last one to be able to do anything meaningful about it. So that is why we're going to continue our fight against climate change. And you think about even the Clean Air Act, which we have. The reason we have a Clean Air Act enacted back in 1970 was the tremendous loss of life when we had the smog event in New York City back in 1966, and almost 170 people lost their lives because of the air quality at the time. So we're living in an era of extreme weather, statement of fact, and we're going to continue doing what we can to help do our part. We're doing our best in New York. We also need other states and the international community to join this fight as well, because I don't know what more evidence they need that we are in a crisis.
All right, to help us understand the state's continuing response to this air quality situation, we're joined by State DEC Commissioner Basil Sagos. Commissioner Sagos, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Thanks for coming in. So it's been an unusual few days.
Yes.
Can you think of any time in your lifetime that we've seen a situation like this in the Northeast?
No, it's totally unprecedented.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the worst air in New York State in probably 50 years, if not more. And it's not from anything of our doing, right? This is wildfires in Canada, which typically blows from the west to the east and off to the Canadian Maritime provinces and off the Atlantic. But it turned around, obviously all that smoke burning 800 miles north, brought all that smoke into New York State and created this unprecedented statewide air quality situation.
I mean, there were a couple days there where New York City had the worst air quality on the planet.
Yes.
Which is really kind of, it's unthinkable.
Remarkable,
Yeah.
right? An otherwise clear day,
Right.
which you could barely see the sun, red skylines. And I think that's when people sort of woke up to the problem that we're facing, which is obviously the creation of smoke during this unusually dry year across the
Very
North
warm,
America.
yeah, very dry. Hundreds of them burning up there right now.
Yep.
What is the DEC's direct role in a situation like this when it comes to state operations, and what are you doing to ensure that people remain safe?
Well, we have a monitoring network across New York State, 54 monitoring stations across the state, which monitors for particulate matter. That's what we're talking about, the stuff that burns off a fire. That's usually particulate matter when it drops through the sky, as it did here. Fires happening outside New York State, we can still monitor the impacts of it here. And we have we apply this network regularly every day to let us know where the problems are around the state so we can advise people. What we learned was it was going to be the statewide event, so we started talking about it on May 31st, every day since, that there's now this air coming into New York. People need to take precautions, remain inside, don't do the outdoor activity. And of course, it got to the point where we were telling schools, as the governor noted, best to avoid outdoor activity. So, we are a big and broad agency. We usually fight fires here in New York. We fight fires elsewhere. It's very unusual that we're talking about advising New Yorkers about the problems from fires in other states or countries.
You know, you talk about the particulate matter, and there is microscopic stuff that we can't see, but we had a hailstorm a few days back. After that hail melted on my deck, and I asked our meteorologist here if it's possible, and yes it is, as it fell to earth, that hail picked up bigger particles, and as it melted on my deck, there were, you know, little black specks all over the place.
Yeah, that's
Which was
right.
kind of, yeah, funny
Yeah,
to see.
the rain or hail or
Right.
snow will pick up the particulate matter that's in the air and bring it down to the ground. It ultimately cleans the sky out,
Sure.
at least temporarily. But we got some questions about that this week. Is the rain that's falling hazardous? Is the hail hazardous? Well, the good news is it's just particulate matter. It's not a toxin necessarily, isn't a danger to your garden or your drinking water. And it happened over such a short period of time, really. This
Right.
isn't the 1960s with, 365 days worth of smog.
So you talk about state firefighters. Has the state offered any assistance to Canada? Well, you know that at the federal level they are doing that.
Yes.
What's happening with New York?
Well, last week, about Wednesday last week, we offered our forest rangers to go fight fires, and they said yes. They took our first crew boss, this crew leader, last Friday. Governor had a conversation with the Council of Canada 2 days ago and said, we're willing to send more. We're experiencing these problems here. Can we help you there? We got a call back immediately, and they said they needed a crew, so we're actually mustering a crew today. They'll leave at some point overnight tonight. A full crew with a crew leader, 7 rangers. We're going to match up forces from other states as well. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont are both going to send crews to our team to go up and drive now hundreds of miles north
Right,
to fight these fires.
and that's kind of a really specialized operation. It's a lot different than fighting a fire in a building.
So true.
Yeah.
But this is not a structural fire, right? So all the firefighters we have across New York State who are amazing at their jobs, they put out fires in buildings. It's a totally different thing to get into the woods and fight a fire. In the case of these fires, they are so remote. These aren't in farmlands with roads and access. This is really remote sections of wilderness. So we'll be getting up there. It'll be a lot of tough days, pulling materials into the woods, creating fire lines, doing breaks. We know how to do this because we go out west every year. We send our crews to California, Washington, Oregon, those million-acre fires.
Yeah.
Bring all that knowledge back, and now we can help Canada.
As we move forward, as we know weather patterns and things can change, we see the break right now, but winds could change. Unfortunately, we're expecting these fires to burn for some time. It could be a rough summer. This couldn't be the last of us seeing smoke like this.
It's true. It's true. These fires won't go out. We do see some rain coming into Canada next week, a couple days of it. It's not going to put the fire out, but it will help to create more favorable firefighting conditions. But there's 6 million acres of fires right now in Canada. We're seeing a very robust, active early fire season in western states. New York State, as you know, has been very dry also for the past month. So we're telling all New Yorkers, don't get complacent. If you're going to use a campfire, make sure it's out 100%. Backyard burning, discouraged, not illegal, but discouraged. Be really smart. And if you smoke, throw your butts.
Right. Well, and
in the
that
right place.
statewide burn ban technically is up now, right?
It's up. It's
but
over.
it's still so dry.
It's
out
so
there.
dry.
Yeah.
It's so dry. So we're hoping for rain statewide.
And be careful.
Thank you. Good point.
All right.
Yep.
Commissioner, thanks so much. Basil Sagos, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Ryan.
Thanks for coming in. All right, the state's congressional maps are set to see more change. As the legal battle continues, we speak with a redistricting expert on the ongoing process that could see district maps change for elections next year. And remember, if you've got a comment or story idea, please let us know. You can always email news@news10.com or reach out on Twitter @WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. To redistricting now. State Supreme Court hearing arguments this week on if current district maps will stay in place. The maps, which were used during last year's congressional elections, were drawn by a court-appointed special master after the Redistricting Commission and state legislature couldn't agree on district lines. The layout was only supposed to be used for that election cycle, but Albany County Supreme Court judge ruled they should stay in place for the next decade. Now that decision is being debated. To get some additional insight on the redistricting process, we turn once again to redistricting expert Professor Jeff Weiss. He's an adjunct professor, a senior fellow at the New York Law School. Professor Weiss, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
So we've talked about this with you before, but the maps used in the 2022 elections, redrawn by that court-appointed special master. And they were only supposed to, most of us thought, for that election only, but a judge has ruled that they can be used for the next decade, and now that is going to be challenged here.
That's right. Yesterday, the appellate division, the mid-level court of appeals in New York, heard arguments seeking to reverse last year's order that where a judge ruled that the congressional plan drawn by the special master and approved by another state court would be used for the rest of the decade. So they are appealing that decision, maintaining that the courts last year were really incomplete in terms of how long the plan would last, whether it was an emergency plan put in place for the 2022 elections or whether it should be used all the way through 2030. The state courts were unclear on that, and that's what's being contested in part now.
It seems like it's hard to find agreement when it comes to redistricting here.
Well, redistricting, it's a zero-sum game. One party wins, one party loses. And what this is coming down to in the national picture is the fight for control of the United States House of Representatives. Yesterday, we saw, for example, in Alabama, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered the creation of one additional black majority congressional district. That would likely be a plus for the Democrats. So similarly, in New York, the Democrats are looking for any way to revisit redistricting and get this back to the state commission and the legislature, could be seen as improving democratic opportunities in next year's elections.
Yeah, the Alabama case, at least, Professor, on its face, seemed pretty egregious. The redistrict maps here in New York have gone back and forth, and they put it in the hands of who was supposed to be the special master, this independent right set of eyes and a voice to supposedly redraw them without any bias.
Well, they're not contesting the map that was created last year. There's no problem with that. The question goes to, did the court have the authority to order that plan to be used for next year through 2030, or was it simply a plan drawn for 2022 because of the time frame? There's so little time last year left to conduct a primary and a general election that somebody had to draw the plan, and that the state itself, the commission and the legislature, failed to do their job according to the way the courts read the Constitution.
And so what do you think? Do you think they have an argument here? Do you think it holds water?
I think it does hold water. The question now gets down to, what will this 5-judge appellate court rule? And then whatever they do, pro or con, good or bad, that's going to be appealed to the State Court of Appeals, and that court has a different membership than it had a year ago. The new Chief Judge, Rowan Wilson, firmly believes that the state legislature should have final determination in who draws the congressional plan. So, there's a lot more ahead of us. This court case has a life ahead of it for the next few months.
And you said, I believe at some point, you also pointed to a separate case in Manhattan where a state judge had ruled that the IRC had to redraw some new assembly maps and were finalized at one point?
That's correct. Because the major case last year that the Court of Appeals dealt with only addressed the state Senate and the congressional plan, the assembly plan was not before the courts. It wasn't challenged last year. But after the big cases were settled and the Senate and congressional plans were drawn, then the assembly plan itself was challenged. And so subsequently, a state judge in Manhattan ruled that the commission needed to go back to work, draw a new assembly plan, send it to the legislature for approval, and get the process back on track. And that's just what happened. The commission agreed on a bipartisan assembly map. The legislature approved it, I think, in late April, and it's going to be used now for the 2024 through 2030 elections. So we're looking to see a replay of that same process for the state government to do its job that it couldn't do last year, and that's what the courts are considering now in Albany.
And of course, that 2024 election cycle will be, well, some would argue we're already in the middle of it, but we'll be here before we know it. Do you think the courts may feel some sort of pressure to come to a decision in time?
Well, there is, some time pressure. The clock is ticking. And we do know that for the June primary next year, when congressional seats, will be up, that the petitioning period starts on or about March 1st or late February of next year. So that really creates a tight time frame for both the appellate division, the court that heard the appeal yesterday, and then later on, the Court of Appeals, the state's highest court, to hear and decide these cases, to provide enough time for the commission, if they so rule in favor of the plaintiffs here, to have the commission get back to work, hold a round of hearings throughout the state, work on the plan together, see what they come up with, and then send it to the legislature, which can reject up to 2 versions of congressional maps. So we are under a bit of a time frame. It's only June now, but
Right.
March is not that far off.
And when it comes to that Court of Appeals, of course, New York State has a new chief judge. What do you know about Judge Wilson, and how do you think he would take a look upon this case?
Okay, so we have Judge Rowan Wilson now as the chief judge, and last year he dissented from the Harkenrider decision that invalidated the congressional plan. Chief Judge Wilson was firmly of the opinion that the redistricting job belongs in the legislature, not in the courts. So he's got a different perspective. Judge Halligan is also new to the court. She has no track record on redistricting, so she's an open question as to how she might rule. But the 4-3 majority that the former chief judge had last year, former Judge DiFiore, isn't there anymore. So Judge Wilson has a different case in front of him now. This case also is not seeking to overturn last year's decision, so he would not be overriding or reversing any precedents.
Professor Jeff Weiss, thank you so much for your time and your expertise. As always, we really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me on again.
More people turn to Medicaid for health coverage during the pandemic. The rules for eligibility are changing after the COVID-19 health emergency ended. We'll explain what you need to do in order to keep that coverage. Remember, if you've got a comment or story idea, please reach out to us. Let us know. You can email us at news@news10.com or reach out on Twitter @WTEN. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. Medicaid enrollment increased during the COVID-19 pandemic, but now that the public health emergency is over, officials say New Yorkers could lose their coverage if they don't renew their eligibility. Our Capitol correspondent, Amel Taliji, explains what to do to make sure you stay covered.
During COVID, Congress prohibited states from dropping anyone from Medicaid regardless of eligibility. This protected health coverage for many people for the past 3 years. But with the pandemic now over, that process has since changed. Some people are eligible for auto renewal, but not all.
We're finding across the country that many people are not aware that what used to be a routine thing every year has restarted, and people are missing the mail and not responding.
Dan Tsai, Deputy Administrator and Director of the Center for Medicaid, says there's 93 million Americans who are enrolled in Medicaid. It's important you update your contact information to ensure you receive the form.
And when you get it, respond, because if you don't respond this time, you will lose coverage, and we do not want that to happen.
Tsai also says if you're a parent who had a recent job or income change and are ineligible for Medicaid, still fill out the form because your child may still be eligible. If you do need to shop around for coverage, you could be eligible for zero premium or low-cost insurance through the marketplace.
So if you are no longer eligible for Medicaid, we strongly encourage that you try to see if you are eligible for coverage through one of the Obamacare plans, or some of you may now have coverage through an employer and will need to enroll through that.
Eric Linzer, President and CEO of the New York Health Plan Association, says this is a large undertaking that will require coordination across the entire industry.
So health plans, hospitals, doctors, community organizations, and the state. And really the goal should be making sure that these individuals have coverage, whether it's Medicaid, the essential plan, or commercial coverage.
Linzer says people usually have 30 to 90 days to respond to that renewal form. Reporting in Albany, Amel Talegi.
All right, our thanks to Amel. Stick around. We'll be right back. We'll look at the week ahead in just a moment. Remember, if you got a comment, story idea, please let us know. Email us at news@news10.com, or you can reach out on Twitter at WTEN. All right, and finally from us here on Empire State Weekly, the New York State legislative session has come to an end. Lawmakers leaving the Capitol, heading back home, not before getting a number of bills pushed over the finish line at the last minute. So next week, once the dust has settled from the session, we're going to be speaking with a public research expert on this year's legislative session overall. For now, from all of us here on Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. We'll see you back here next week. Don't forget, you can catch Empire State Weekly all over the state of New York. Here's our full schedule of where you can see us on 10 television stations across New York.